Well, good morning and welcome to North Tarrant Church. We are delighted that you've chosen to join us in our online campus, whether you're watching through Facebook, YouTube, or through our North Tarrant online platform. Thank you very much. Now, while you're there, do us a favor. Would you jump in the comments and just let us know who you are and where you're watching from? It's fun to see where people are engaging with us from. I know there's been people from Canada, from the great Northeast, from all over the state of Texas that have been watching with you online, and I want to say thank you very much. Now, while times have certainly been changing, one of the things that we know for sure is this, is the heartbeat with which we do what we do has certainly not changed. We want you to know that we are for you. We know that there are difficulties in life, and we know that at times like these, more than ever, it is critical that you have people that are in your corner that believe in you and are for you. And we want to be that for you. Now, if there's anything we could be praying for you about, I would love for you to grab your phone, shoot us a text message, 682-233-5424. We would love to be able to talk with you, to chat with you, but also to be able to pray with the requests that you have that are weighing you down today. Not only that, but we want to keep you informed. With that same number, shoot us a text message and let us know an active email address so that we can keep you up to date on as things change, as we get to meet back in our facility together. We want to make sure you're the first to know as well. Now, for those of you that have families, that have kids, our family ministry teams, Wombaland, Upstreet, and Transit have done a remarkable job of providing content for your family to engage with online. And I would encourage you after this, or maybe later in the afternoon after lunch, to get together as a family, to do the activity, and to have fun together. Now, we're about to hand it over to the band, but before we do that, I want to invite you, go grab a cup of coffee, freshen it up, maybe go drop a piece of toast in the toaster, and then invite a couple of friends to watch it with you. Maybe share it on Facebook, and we'll see you in just a few minutes as we kick off this morning's service. Thank you. Happy Mother's Day, North Tarrant Church. We are so delighted that you and maybe your mother chose to join us this morning. Hey, we're going to be here for a few moments, but while I've got a moment, I want to give a quick shout out to my mother, who actually lives just about 2.2 miles away from us. I know that because my boys and I have tracked it on bikes on multiple times. But not just my mother, to my mother-in-law, to Alden's stepmom, and then also I'd like to give a wonderful shout out to my wife, who is an incredible mother to our two boys. Happy Mother's Day, you ladies, and happy Mother's Day to everybody this morning. Absolutely. Hey, we're so glad that you're here this morning. We're going to be here for a few moments. We're going to sing a few songs, and we're actually going to continue the service, continue the conversation around this idea of living in the meantime. And today we are in for a treat, as there's Andy Jones, who is a friend of ours as a church, as well as one of the leaders and directors at North Point Community Church. He's going to be sharing a story about how he has overcome his in the meantime moment. And it is powerful, it is incredible, and I'm looking forward to being able to share it with you today. Now, having said all that, if this is your first time here, I want you to know our mission is this, is we desire to inspire people, regardless of where you are, to follow after Jesus. We genuinely believe that as you follow Jesus, you begin to see your circumstances differently. You begin to see with hope and joy and love, even in the most difficult and trying times like we find ourselves in today. Now, without further ado, I want to hand it over to our band, to Paul and to Grant, as they're going to be leading us in a few songs. So happy Mother's Day, wherever you are. Stand, sit, grab another cup of coffee. Why don't you sing with us this morning? Thanks.
Good morning, like Scott said, welcome to North Tarrant and happy Mother's Day. Come on. When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken, 'cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide, and I am not captive to the lie. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. Oh, I won't be shaken. Oh, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out the grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. There's power in your name. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out the grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. Power in your name. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are way maker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are way maker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are way maker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are way maker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Even when I can't see you, you're working. Even when I can't feel you, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I can't see you, you're working. Even when I can't feel you, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I can't see you, you're working. Even when I can't feel you, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I can't see you, you're working. Even when I can't feel you, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. You are waymaker, miracle worker. darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are.
In order to share my family story with you, it's really important that I introduce you to, like I said, my three favorite people. This is my wife, Christina. She is absolutely amazing. I could literally talk about her for hours, but it will suffice to say I married way, way, way over my head. This is my son, Eli. He is absolutely brilliant and loves anything and everything technology, and he has the heart of, of something extremely big. I can't think of anything right now that has a heart bigger than Eli, but he has a huge heart, okay? And this is my daughter, Peyton. And Peyton is not only beautiful and artistic and creative, but she has her daddy wrapped around her little finger like nobody's business. And they are each such an inspiration to me in their own unique way. But things haven't always been like this. You see, about 8 years ago, whenever Eli was 3 and Peyton was a newborn, my wife and I began to realize that Eli had some delays in his speech. He had some delays in his eye contact, and he had developed some interesting behaviors that were repetitious. Some people call them stems, and he would flip things really quickly. It was just abnormal for a 3-year-old to do those things. And so as any concerned parent would, we contacted an organization, and we wanted to have him evaluated and tested to see what was going on. And so we did that, and we waited for the phone to ring. And when the phone rang, a lady on the other end said, "Mr. Jones, we have the results of Eli's evaluation, and we would love to meet with you to discuss them." And so we scheduled an appointment. And on that day, my wife and I, we walked into this strange, cold room that had kid-sized furniture everywhere. I mean, we're looking around, we're like, all right, where else are we seriously gonna have this meeting? Because this seems like a serious meeting, and there are pre-K chairs and pre-K tables everywhere. But nonetheless, I mean, we sat down in these pre-K chairs across a pre-K table, and a lady sat down and she opened her folder. And she said, "Based on our findings, your son Eli is autistic." Wait, what? I mean, I didn't know much about autism at the time, but what I did know, it wasn't good. And as we left, we began to research what this meant for our family. We began to process what this meant for our family. And I've got to be honest, I couldn't help but notice how many dads were out in the front yard throwing the ball with their sons. And I wondered, would I ever be able to play catch with my boy? Couldn't help but notice all of the conversations that were taking place between children and their parents. And I wondered to myself, would Eli ever be able to know that I loved him? Would he ever be able to tell me that he loved me? Would he ever be able to speak those words? Would he ever be able to understand or comprehend the love and the grace and the peace that only Jesus offers? I mean, our worlds were officially rocked, and we didn't know what to do. And then about 2 years later, we began to see some similar characteristics in our daughter, Peyton. And we were all too familiar with this process. So we contacted the same organization, and we had the same evaluations and the same tests done on our baby girl. And we waited for the phone to ring. And on that day, a lady on the other end said, Mr. Jones, we have the results of Peyton's evaluation, and we would love to meet with you to discuss them. So my wife and I scheduled a meeting, and we walked into the same strange, cold room that still had this tiny, I'm 6'5". I don't know if it was humor or what was going on, but they still had this tiny furniture. So we sat again in these pre-K chairs across the same pre-K table. And the same lady sat down and opened her folder, and she said, based on our findings, your daughter Peyton is autistic. And in that moment, the full weight of autism was resting on my shoulders. And I couldn't help but begin to ask, why is this happening to me? Why is this going on? Is one not hard enough? Now we have to have two? Was I exposed to some type of a chemical whenever I was younger? I don't know how all that works, but was my DNA or my kid's DNA somehow affected by something that I was exposed to? Or maybe that's not it. Maybe, God, are you mad at me? Did I do something or say something that you're punishing me for, or you're trying to get even with me? Because I can remember growing up as a young boy, I lived in a neighborhood with a kid down the street, and he had a mental disability, and I made fun of him. And as much as I didn't realize what those words meant, and as much as I realized I would take them back if I could, did God hear young Andy say those words and say, you know what? If you want to say that to him, then I'm going to give you him. If you want to say that to him, then I'm going to give you her. Was God getting even with me for something I said so many years earlier? Or maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about my wife. Maybe God was mad at her or trying to get even with her for some reason. Or maybe before we got married, whenever she got cold feet, maybe that was more than just her nerves. Maybe that was God saying, don't do it. This is not going to end well. I promise you will regret it. And maybe she should have never married me to begin with. But let's be honest, she made the right choice, right? But that's what we wondered. That's what we want. And for the next year and a half, I spent my time thinking of all of the families that were living the lives that I was supposed to be able to live. I thought about all the kids that were enjoying the freedoms and the simplicities that my kids were supposed to be able to enjoy. And we began to wonder about our future. Would Eli ever be able to drive a car? Would Peyton ever get married? You guys, would I be able to walk my baby girl down the aisle? Would the Jones name continue, or would it end with my son? And we began to wonder, would life even be able to look normal or simple in the meantime, in this moment? Would we be able to go shopping as a family? Would we be able to go out to eat? Just the four of us, because my kids' behavior was so loud and uncontrollable at times that we were often embarrassed to even go out in public with them. And I can remember one afternoon, my wife took my son to lunch with her mom, and they were sitting, enjoying their meal, and Eli was having a really tough day, and he was being very loud. And a man walked up from his table, and he stood at my wife's table, and he looked her in the face, and he said, if you can't control your son, find someone who can. And it's words like that that are not easily forgotten. It's words like that, it's wounds like that you just can't simply get over. You carry them and carry them and carry them. I'll never be happy again. Nothing good can come from this. There's no point in continuing. You see, my kids in this season of our lives, my kids had become a problem to solve instead of children to love. My kids, my precious gifts from God, had become a problem for me to solve instead of children for me to love. And if you're anything like me today, then you know exactly what I'm talking about when something bad happens to you. When something goes wrong in your life, it's easy for us to look at it and to jump into problem-solving mode. It's easy for us to look at it and to jump into damage control mode. Because when something goes wrong, we want to avoid it. We want to solve it as quickly as we can. We want to move past it. We want to get around it. We want to make sure that we don't have to suffer through this pain or this suffering any longer than absolutely necessary. But as a part of that problem-solving and damage control mode, we begin to ask some questions. And it's perfectly natural and normal for us to ask these questions. But we want to know why this happened. We want to know whose fault it is, who's to blame. We want to know, how long is this going to happen? God, are you mad at me? Are you punishing me? Did you do something to deserve this somehow? You start to ask yourself questions. You start to ask other people questions. You start to ask God questions. And those questions are perfectly normal. But that's why most of us today, we've asked questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? Because we see good people and we see these bad things happening to them and we're like, that's not fair, that's not right, that shouldn't happen, that shouldn't exist. And we begin to ask questions about it. We begin to look at it and say, how do we figure this out? How do we solve this problem? And in order to solve it, we begin to ask questions. Why does it happen? Who's to blame? Who's at fault? How do we get past it? How do we avoid it? How do we make sure it never happens again? And it's perfectly normal for us to ask these kind of questions. But it's not just us. All throughout history, people have been seeing things go wrong. They have been seeing bad things happen. And they've been asking big questions about those problems, about those circumstances. And even the people in the New Testament did this. Even the friends and the followers of Jesus, they looked at something that had happened that wasn't right or something that had gone wrong. And they said, wait a second, I've got some questions about this. And so what I want to do is I want to look at a conversation with you that Jesus has between a couple of his friends, a couple of his disciples in the book of John in chapter 9. And in this particular conversation, the disciples notice that something has happened that makes them raise their eyebrows. Something has happened that they see as wrong. And they have some big questions for Jesus about it, questions that you and I can probably identify with. But the questions aren't what's important this morning. The important thing is the response that Jesus has, the answer that he has. Because I believe in the answer that Jesus has in face of this question, we could find it changes the way we see in the meantime. Now, as we jump into this passage, we find Jesus walking along with a couple of his friends, and they come across a man who's born blind. As he, Jesus, went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned? All right, you see, here it is. Who sinned? Who did it? Who's to blame here? Who's at fault? Why is this happening, right? They're focusing on what went wrong, just like we do. That's perfectly normal, perfectly natural. Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, can we just stop and pause for a second and recognize the fact that this is probably an extremely uncomfortable or awkward conversation? It's like the disciples, they're so eager to ask Jesus this question that they forget that they're probably in the presence of the man that they're asking it about. I can't help but imagine the blind guy, he's sitting there, he's minding his own business, and he hears a few guys walk up. And one of them says, Rabbi, this guy's blind. Is it his fault or is it his parents' fault? Who messed up? Who caused this? And the blind guy's probably hearing this thinking, hey, like I can hear you. I'm right here. Like, can you be any more rude? And Jesus maybe walks over and is like, I'm sorry, sir. I apologize. I can't take them anywhere. It's like they're 5 years old. They'll ask the questions just like in the supermarket to anyone and everyone. Right, but we can identify and we can understand that question because they saw something that wasn't supposed to be. They saw something that wasn't right, and they want to know why, and we want to know why. Now, Jesus is faced with this very, very important question. Who did this? Who sinned? Was it this man or was it his parents? And when he heard this question, luckily for me, luckily for my wife, he didn't say it was his parents' fault. They should have never gotten married to begin with. It was his parents' fault. They should have never had this child that grew up to be this man. No, he didn't say that. And luckily for us, he didn't say it was this man's fault. It was his fault that he's blind, because he is going to do something in his life that God knows about. And God is punishing him and withholding his vision from him in order to get even, because God is angry. It was his fault. No, he didn't say that either. But what he did say, the answer that he did have in the face of this question that I often ask, and most likely you often ask, it changed my life. This is what he said. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. It's like he doesn't even get distracted by the question. Look, guys, I understand why you're asking this. I get it. But you're focused on the wrong thing. You want to point the finger, but you're focused on the wrong thing. I'm concerned about something different. And he continues on, and he says, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him in the meantime. Now, if you've read this story before, then you realize that Jesus actually goes on and he performs a miracle. And he heals the man of his blindness. But I don't want to get it confused today. The point of the story is not the miracle. Because if the point of the story is the miracle, then what do I do with autism? What do you do with your job? What do you do with your finances, your health, or your family? No, the point of the story isn't the miracle. The point of the story is the conversation that happens before the miracle, the conversation when Jesus is asked a question that all of us at one point in our lives have asked or will ask. And he looks at that question and he says, no, I get it, I understand. You're focused on who's to blame, on what went wrong, on problem solving, on how to avoid this, how to get out of this, how to figure it out so we can move on. But you're focused on the wrong thing. I'm concerned about God being on display in this man. I'm focused on God being on display in his circumstances. And I think the same is true for me today. That while it's my natural inclination to say, what went wrong? What do I want to focus on? How do I figure this out? How do I avoid this? God is more concerned with how he can be on display in autism, how he can be on display in the meantime for me, in my family, in my circumstances, than he is, let's figure out this problem. And I think the same is true for you. God can be on display in your circumstances, in the meantime in your life. Now, it's completely possible that while God can be on display in the meantime for you and for me, that God is on display and we don't even see it. We don't even realize it, that God could be doing something incredible in the meantime for you and for me, and we don't know it's happening. Now, you've heard it said that hindsight is 20/20, right? In hindsight's 20/20, it means this. It means whenever I'm in the middle of a circumstance or a situation, whenever I feel like I'm over my head or something difficult is going on, it's really difficult for me to see anything good coming from this situation. Right? Because all I can focus on is what is right in front of my face. All I can focus on is the bad that's happening to me. Because it's in our nature, we want to focus on what's wrong. We want to focus on figuring out the problem and asking why this is happening. However, once I step out of this situation and I allow enough distance or time to remove me from that, I can look back and see much more clearly. I can look back and say, well, even though in the meantime, even though in the moment, even though in the season, I didn't see anything good happening from this, now I can see God on display. And I met this person and it took my life in this direction. And now I'm much better off because of it. Or I got rid of this influence or this person or this habit in my life. And now I'm much healthier because of it. We can look back and say, oh, although in the moment I didn't see that, now I can see it much more clearly because hindsight is 20/20. Now, the reason that I feel that hindsight's 20/20 is because of this. Now don't miss this. Because when we focus on what's wrong, you lose sight of what's right. When you focus on what's wrong, you lose sight of what God makes right. Because whenever we're focused over here, whenever we're looking at who's to blame, who's at fault, was it him, was it her, was it me? How do I avoid this? How do I escape this? How do I numb myself enough where I can completely forget this ever happened in my life? And even though I'm going through it, I don't even feel it. Whenever we focus on what's wrong, we lose sight of what God is doing in our midst, in our circumstances, and in the meantime. Now, it's important to recognize the fact that what I feel like needs to be made right and what you feel like needs to be made right might not be what God feels like needs to be made right. And what the timing in which I feel like and you feel like it needs to be made right might not be the timing in which God feels like it needs to be made right. But whenever I realized this, whenever I realized as long as I'm focused on what went wrong, I'm losing sight, I'm unable to see what God is making right. Whenever I realized that, it changed everything for me. It changed my heart, it changed my attitude, it changed the way that I saw autism, the way that I saw in the meantime. And we began to see, God, you've been on display all along, and we haven't even realized it. In a situation that we thought nothing good can come from this, you have been doing good in this, and our eyes have been closed because we've been focused over here. I'll give you an example. A teacher that my son absolutely adored during some of the worst behavioral seasons of his life. She took a liking to Eli, and she developed a relationship with our family. And then she started to ask some big faith questions. And not too long after that, she decided to begin a relationship with Jesus. And not too long after that, her husband decided to begin a relationship with Jesus. And over and over and over again, we saw that God was doing something incredible in the midst of autism in the meantime. And we had no idea because we were so focused on what went wrong and who's to blame. Is it my fault? Is it her fault? We didn't see it, and it changed our lives. At one point, I thought that autism was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now, it's the best. You see, autism has taught me to be a better father. Autism has taught me how to be a better husband. Autism has taught me how to truly trust Jesus. Autism has taught me that while autism will be a part of our family for the rest of our lives, it will not be a part of my children for all of eternity, because there will come a day, and God promises to wipe every tear, to change every thought that gets stuck in their brain, and release every word that gets caught in their mouth, and every difficulty they have socially and verbally and with eye contact. God says, I'm going to remove all that. I'm going to wipe all that away. There will be a day when your family no longer suffers from this. But in the meantime, Andy, I want to teach you something. And autism has helped me understand that God can make something beautiful from what I feel is terrible. And instead of hoping that God would do a miracle in my kids, I've realized that He already has. And He continues to. So imagine with me for a second. Imagine that you were somehow able to focus less on what went wrong and more on, God, what are you making right in this? I know it's difficult. I know it seems impossible, but God, what are you doing right in the midst of these difficult circumstances? What are you doing right in the meantime? What would happen? How much weight would that lift off your shoulders if you didn't have to play the blame game anymore? If you didn't have to worry what you did to deserve this? Or is God mad at you? Is He punishing you? Is He withholding something from you? Is your family cursed? Is this going to go on forever? How much pressure would that take off of you if you didn't have to go and drink or do drugs or alcohol to somehow escape the pain? How would that change the way that you looked at your family? How would that change the way you looked at your job, your health? How would that change the way you looked at your life if we were somehow able to shift our focus to see, God, what are you doing in this? What are you doing in the meantime? And what if the people surrounding you, what if the people in your life, they looked at your seemingly insurmountable circumstances that you shouldn't be able to overcome, that they wouldn't be able to overcome if they were in your shoes? What if the people surrounding you looked at your seemingly insurmountable circumstances and saw you having hope and joy and peace and patience and understanding and focusing on what God was doing right in the meantime in your life? What would it do to their relationship with their Heavenly Father? What would it do to their hope? What would it do to their joy? How would it change their faith if somehow you were able to make it through the other side and say, you know what, it might still be going on. You know what, it might still be difficult, but God is on display. God is present here.
Wow. So touching. Andy, thank you for sharing your story today. You know, I don't know about you, but whenever we talk about the struggles of life, the circumstances that inevitably do not go our way, there's a challenge in all of us. Do we look at the negative? Do we look at what's gone wrong? Or do we deflect and do we focus our attention on what God is writing in the midst of these stories? You know, it's a subtle change, ultimately. It's a subtle shift as we balance life, as we process life. And ultimately, that shift from focusing on what is wrong to focusing on what God is writing, it takes patience. Listen to what a friend of mine said in talking about this. He said that he shared with me that patience is what develops patience develops from the perseverance of focusing on what God is making right. There's that focus, that without focus, it is natural for us to compare. Isn't it? It's natural for us to compare our kids, to compare our families, to compare our lives, our circumstances, to compare everything else. Without the focus on what God is writing in the midst of us, it's easy for us to focus on what is wrong, what's not going well, what's not going the way we want it to. And we see what we see, but then we also see the beautiful picture of what everybody else is posting, right? Listen to this. This is what a friend of mine said. When we see what we see of others' lives is really, it's their family portrait. And today on Mother's Day, many of you you're gonna have many takes, and you know what's on the other side of the camera as you're taking your Mother's Day picture. But what you're portraying is that one shot that maybe has everybody smiling, or maybe you got one with your youngest smiling, you got one with your oldest smiling, and so you know Photoshop well enough to blend the two together and maybe make you at a beach instead of in your backyard. Regardless, you know the storm that's on the other side of the camera, and you also know what you publish. And so when we see our lives as a family portrait, everything is balanced and beautiful. What we see of everybody else, it's really not real. It's a hold still for a moment. And then we compare ourselves to that. But isn't it true? It's all a matter of perspective. I mean, in the middle of the storm, everything looks bad. When we're in the middle of those crazy circumstances, when we're in the middle of this struggle and the tension and the angst, it's as if everything is wrong and nothing could ever go right. So it's natural, if our focus is off, to compare to other people. In fact, listen to what somebody said about comparison. It says, at the end of the day, it's a matter of perspective, right? And when I begin to compare, what I compare is ultimately myself against the materialistic things of other people. And it's not okay. It's not what gives me peace. So how do we make this shift? What does this look like in our lives? I love this reminder. I had a friend of mine say that I have to remember that what God has and what He's providing me, like my health and my family, and that in the midst of those, that He's writing a better story, and I just have to stay focused on what He's saying. Had another friend of mine that said that they are in a very stressful season in life, and you probably could relate. But they had to turn to God, and that in turning to God and putting their dependency upon God in these moments, They felt peace about stepping back and reevaluating a significant life decision that ultimately was overwhelming them. And I want you to think about this. Think about this from the perspective of COVID-19. I mean, when COVID-19 is nothing more than a story that we will tell, what is the story that it will tell of you? What's the story that will be said of you when COVID-19 is nothing but a story we tell about? For some of you, it hasn't necessarily been the virus or the pandemic, but it's been the hurdles of life in the midst of it. For some of you, it's caused the frustrations of you not being able to see your mom today. Or maybe for some of you, you've lost a loved one, or maybe this is your first Mother's Day without your mother. For some of you, this is your first Mother's Day as a mother, and you so desperately wanted to celebrate today with all of your friends and family, and we're caught in an in-between. We're caught in an in the meantime moment. So let me ask you this. What if in this moment that God is really not absent, not apathetic, but he really is caring? What if we chose to believe that even though our circumstances are insurmountable, that we are going to find contentment in the fact that Christ is writing a remarkable story in my life? And what if we chose to accept, to receive these circumstances as a gift with a promise and a gift with a purpose? What if that was the story of COVID-19? What if that was the story that God is writing in and through your life? You see, I believe that through North Tarrant Church, through your lives, through your stories, that God is writing a bigger story. And that God is writing stories that will bring encouragement to countless families, neighbors, individuals, friends. But for that to be the case, it involves us changing our perspective. It involves us having the patience to process and to think about what is in front of us. And not to focus on the devastation, but to focus on the story that God is writing in your life. You see, I want to encourage you as we close the service today to allow this plea, this prayer to be your prayer. In fact, I want to encourage you. I know that there's insurmountable things that are in front of you, but what if we were to collectively come together and take our doubts and our fears and all of our cares and we put them at the feet of a heavenly Father that loves you, that knows everything about you and yet still loves you with a love that is bigger than we could ever imagine? What if we chose to take these cares and place them in the arms of a heavenly Father who cares deeply for you? After our band leads us in this song, I would encourage you to sing along with us, to allow this song to be your prayer. And then I'll see you on Facebook Live momentarily as we continue this conversation.